300 miles from home, standing in front of a rustic cabin with nothing but a backpack and the sound of car doors slamming shut behind me, that is where my wife's family thought their little joke would end. They were wrong. It was only the beginning of a reckoning they never saw coming. To truly understand how I ended up on that porch, watching the tail lights of my own family's vehicles disappear into the dust, you have to understand the 3 years that preceded it. From the moment I married Chloe, her family treated me like an outsider who had somehow slipped through the security gates of their lives. Her father was a loud, overbearing man who measured worth entirely by aggression and dominance. Her brother was a carbon copy, a bully wrapped in a designer suit. Because I was a man of quiet habits, a systems analyst who preferred reading to shouting and compromise to conflict, they labeled me as soft. They mistook my patience for weakness, my good manners for cowardice, and my respect for their daughter as a total lack of a backbone. For 36 months, I endured their backhanded compliments at dinner tables, their snickers at holiday gatherings, and the subtle, toxic ways they tried to make me feel small in my own marriage. Then came the annual family retreat. Every year, her relatives gathered at this remote cabin for what they called bonding time. I had managed to avoid it for 3 years straight, always finding convenient work conflicts or pressing obligations. This year, however, Chloe made it her personal mission. She insisted I come, claiming her parents specifically requested my presence because they wanted to get to know me better. She looked at me with those innocent eyes, making it impossible to refuse, promising it would mean everything to her. I agreed, believing it was an olive branch. It was a massive mistake. The drive up was strange from the very start. Normally, her family was loud, chaotic, and argumentative during car trips, but this time, an eerie, performative politeness hung in the air. Her brother and sister kept exchanging glances in the rearview mirror, whispering to each other before snickering quietly. Her parents maintained a weird, forced conversation about the weather and gas prices. I should have trusted my instincts when her father kept asking, with a strange grin, if I had brought enough clothes for an extended stay. When I asked what he meant, he just laughed it off, telling me you never know what might happen up in the wilderness. The cabin sat on 40 acres of practically nothing. There were no cell towers nearby, no neighbors for miles, just an ocean of dense pine trees and a narrow dirt road that disappeared into the wilderness. The atmosphere was suffocatingly isolated. The forest didn't feel peaceful, it felt watchful, heavy with a silence that seemed to cut us off from the rest of the civilized world. We unloaded the cars, and I noticed they had packed significantly more supplies than usual. There were multiple coolers, extra blankets, and enough food for 2 weeks instead of a typical weekend trip. When I mentioned it, her mother just smiled tightly and said they wanted to be prepared for anything. That first evening felt deeply wrong. Whenever I entered a room, ongoing conversations would stop abruptly. Her father kept checking his watch every few minutes, like he was waiting for a countdown to hit 0. Her brother couldn't make eye contact without grinning like a schoolyard bully who had just hidden someone's lunch. The whole family seemed to be sharing an inside joke that I was deliberately excluded from. After we went to bed, I heard hushed whispering from the next room. I caught fragments of voices discussing the upcoming morning, making sure he doesn't suspect anything. I lay in the dark, convincing myself I was just being paranoid. These people had welcomed me into their home, treated me relatively well on the surface for years, so surely I was misreading the situation. The next morning proved I wasn't paranoid enough. I woke up early to find the house completely quiet, but when I looked out the window, the family was already dressed and rapidly loading their cars. I walked outside, confused, and asked what was happening. They exchanged those familiar, wicked looks again. Her father stepped forward with that same forced, plastic smile he had been wearing all weekend. He announced they had decided to head back early due to urgent work calls. Sensing something was terribly amiss, I turned to grab my backpack, but that's when her brother broke out into a full-belly laugh. It wasn't a polite chuckle, it was a cruel, mocking roar, like he had just witnessed the funniest joke of his life. Her sister joined in, then her mother, until the whole family was laughing at me. Only Chloe stared at the ground, her face flushed with a mixture of guilt and anxiety. When I demanded to know what was so funny, her father cleared his throat, still grinning broadly. He told me the truth, I wasn't coming with them. He called it a character-building exercise, a modern rite of passage. The words didn't process immediately. Her mother cheerfully explained that they were leaving me here for a week, maybe 2, depending on how long it took for me to figure things out. Chloe finally looked up, claiming it was just a test because her family thought I had things too easy, that I needed to prove myself and show I could handle real adversity. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. They had planned this elaborate setup for 6 months just to abandon me in the middle of nowhere like a contestant on some twisted survival show. All those whispered conversations, the extra supplies they packed for themselves, the fake smiles, it had all been building to this moment of public humiliation. Her brother pulled out his phone, recording my face, mocking me, waiting for me to beg. They left me 4 days of food, a stream half a mile north for water, and a few basic tools in case I wanted to try hunting or fishing. They honestly expected me to break down, cry, and plead for them not to leave. They wanted me to prove their point that I was soft, dependent, and incapable. Instead of giving them the satisfaction of a tantrum, I walked over to the porch, sat down calmly on the wooden steps, and looked at them. Her father seemed deeply disappointed by my lack of a dramatic reaction. Her brother, still recording, complained that this was supposed to be a big moment for me. I looked at Chloe, who still couldn't meet my eyes, and asked how long they had been planning this. She admitted it had been 6 months, ever since her dad decided I seemed too comfortable. 6 months of lies. 6 months of planning my humiliation like it was a family vacation. They had smiled at me across dinner tables and made small talk at birthday parties, all while secretly designing an elaborate punishment for the crime of existing in their daughter's life. Standing up and brushing off my jeans, I told them they had better get going before it got dark. The family exchanged deeply confused looks. This wasn't the script they had written in their heads. They loaded into their cars, still expecting a last-minute breakdown, but I just stood on the porch and calmly waved goodbye as their tail lights disappeared down the dirt road, leaving nothing but dust and a profound, deafening silence. As the noise of their engines faded completely, a strange realization washed over me. Instead of panic, despair, or terror, I felt something much more dangerous to them. I felt relief. The absolute quiet of being completely alone for the first time in years was liberating. There was no background chatter, no critical in-laws, no constant buzz of notifications. Just me and 40 acres of wilderness. I walked back into the cabin to take inventory. They had left canned goods, some bread, basic staples, a manual can opener, matches, a first aid kit, and a hunting knife. They probably thought I'd cut myself trying to use it. But the cabin itself was more substantial than I had realized. It had solid wood construction, a working stone fireplace, and a hand-pumped well in the kitchen that produced crystal-clear water. It had been built by people who truly understood self-sufficiency. In a cabinet, I found a stack of old journals filled with entries from previous family visits dating back decades. Most were boring accounts of fishing trips, but as I dug deeper, I found something life-changing. Hidden behind a false panel at the bottom of the cabinet was a heavy, locked steel box. Using a rusted screwdriver from the kitchen drawer, I managed to pry it open. Inside were old photographs, a pristine set of mechanical tools, and a thick bundle of letters written by Chloe's grandfather, the man who had built this cabin. As I read through his elegant, faded handwriting, my heart raced. The journals revealed a stunning truth: the grandfather had suffered the exact same psychological torture from his own spouse and children decades ago. They had mocked his quiet nature, called him weak, and tried to break his spirit. In his final letter, written shortly before his passing, he wrote that he had built this cabin not as a family retreat, but as a secret sanctuary. He knew his lineage was breeding a culture of arrogant, cruel bullies. He wrote that he was leaving a heavy-duty, vintage motorcycle hidden under a tarp behind the old tool shed, fully preserved, along with a secret cache of fuel stabilizer and spare parts. He wrote, Asterisk if you are reading this, it means they have pushed you to the brink and left you here to break. But this place is not a prison, it is a crucible. The tools are here. The freedom is yours. If you have the spine to choose yourself over their cruelty, ride out and never look back, asterisk. Discovering this secret legacy changed everything. My survival journey was no longer an isolation, it was a fated inheritance. I spent the next full day behind the tool shed, pulling off the dusty tarp to reveal a magnificent, solid old motorcycle. The engine was completely sound, but the fuel system needed a thorough cleaning, and the battery was dead. Fortunately, I had spent years working on engines with my own father in my younger days, a skill Chloe's family knew absolutely nothing about. By late afternoon, the engine roared to life, a beautiful, thunderous sound that echoed through the trees, signaling the end of my captivity. Using the motorcycle, I easily navigated the dirt roads out to the main highway and found a small mountain community 15 miles south. It was a tight-knit town serving hunters and tourists, featuring a general store, a diner, and a small motel. I walked into the diner, ordered a coffee, and spoke with the waitress. Within an hour, I was talking to the gruff owner, who desperately needed a morning cook for the breakfast shifts. I took the job on the spot for cash under the table and free meals. By my third day, I had established a flawless routine, cooking in the morning, exploring the mountains on the motorcycle in the afternoon, and reading the grandfather's journals by the fire at night. When my phone finally picked up a brief satellite internet connection, it buzzed with 17 missed messages. Chloe had texted, asking how I was holding up and hoping I wasn't too mad. Her casual tone, as if she had simply forgotten a dinner reservation rather than orchestrating my abandonment, was chilling. I typed back a single word, "Fine." An hour later, she replied that her dad wanted to know if I needed anything, mentioning there was a town 15 miles south if I wanted to walk there. They had researched the distance perfectly, proving this was a calculated, psychological experiment designed to break me systematically. I didn't respond further and turned off the phone. After 10 days of silence, Chloe called again, and I finally answered. She demanded to know where I had been and why I wasn't answering. When I told her I had been busy working a job at a local diner and doing construction help on weekends, the silence on the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. She was horrified, telling me I was supposed to be learning a lesson about hardship, not starting a new career. She snapped that I was acting like a child running away from home and ordered me to pack my things and come back. I looked out the cabin window at the mountains, painted gold by the setting sun, and told her I liked it here. The work was honest, the people were straightforward, and nobody played psychological games for entertainment. She tried to claim they were just trying to help me grow as a person, and that my sudden independence proved their cruel experiment had actually worked. The twisted logic was fascinating. Even my success was being reframed as justification for their cruelty. I told her she was right about one thing, I was showing independence, starting with the independence to choose whether I ever wanted to see her family again. I hung up. The following weekend, the local contractor I had been helping, a weathered man in his 60s named Marcus, noticed my knack for precision and woodwork. He looked at the straight walls and flawless roof repairs we had done on a local property and asked if I wanted to learn the trade properly. He told me there was immense money to be made from wealthy city folks buying mountain retreats, and he had more projects than he could handle. He offered to partner with me, estimating I could be fully independent in 6 months. The cost of living here was a fraction of the city, and the peace was priceless. 3 weeks into my new life, a heavy truck pulled into the cabin's driveway. Through the window, I watched Chloe's father and brother climb out, both looking grim, arrogant, and determined to restore the natural order of things. I stepped onto the porch to meet them. In just 3 weeks, I had lost weight, gained serious muscle definition from the physical labor, and possessed a confident mountain tan. I looked healthier and more formidable than I had in years. Her father looked at me, confused, noting that I looked different. Her brother stepped forward aggressively, telling me the games were over and it was time to come home and face reality. I crossed my arms, refusing to move from the porch, and told them that this was reality, and they were the ones living in a fantasy where abandoning people was an acceptable tradition. When her father threatened that they came to bring me back one way or another, I calmly asked how exactly they planned to execute that. They exchanged glances, suddenly realizing their physical intimidation had zero power out here. What were they going to do? Try to kidnap a grown man on his own terms. For 20 minutes, they stood in my driveway, exhausting every manipulation technique they had. First came the guilt trips about family obligations, then practical concerns about my apartment and corporate job, followed by barely veiled threats about what would happen if I didn't come to my senses. I listened patiently, letting them completely empty their ammunition. When they finished, I calmly offered them a cup of coffee. The gesture confused them more than outright hostility would have. Her father snapped that they weren't here for coffee, but I simply replied that I was here by choice, and they left frustrated and empty-handed. The escalation didn't stop there. Chloe called repeatedly, cycling through tears, anger, bargaining, and threats. She eventually claimed she was speaking to a therapist who suggested I was experiencing a form of reverse Stockholm syndrome, identifying with my isolation instead of recognizing that my family was just trying to help me. It was laughable. They drove away and left me stranded, but because I succeeded and found happiness, they tried to reframe my sanity as a mental illness. Taking that as a direct threat of forced medical or legal intervention, I took immediate, preemptive action. The next morning, I rode the motorcycle to the county courthouse an hour away. I legally filed papers to establish permanent residency, registered to vote, and opened a local bank account. I also retained a sharp, local family attorney named Evelyn. As I told her my story, her expression shifted from professional curiosity to utter amazement. I showed her the video her brother had proudly posted on social media of my abandonment, along with screenshots of all their threatening and manipulative text messages. Evelyn informed me that their actions legally constituted abandonment, potential false imprisonment, and criminal conspiracy. While I wasn't interested in pursuing criminal charges, I wanted absolute legal protection. She immediately drew up a formal cease and desist letter and helped me establish airtight documentation proving I was of sound mind, fully employed, and acting entirely under my own free will. 2 weeks later, the final storm arrived. Chloe and her entire family showed up at the cabin unannounced, but this time they brought reinforcements, a local social worker they had misled and a private mental health counselor. They climbed out of 3 separate vehicles, ready to stage a coordinated, forced intervention. I watched them from the window, picked up the legal portfolio Evelyn had prepared, and walked out onto the porch. The social worker stepped forward, stating she was there because of deep concerns regarding my welfare, mental state, and reports that I was in a severe psychological crisis. I stood tall, looked her directly in the eyes, and asked if I looked like a man in crisis. She studied me carefully. I was clean, physically fit, healthy, and completely coherent. The cabin behind me was immaculate, and the functional motorcycle sat proudly in the driveway. There wasn't a single shred of evidence suggesting distress or incapacity. She admitted I looked perfectly fine, but noted that the family was deeply concerned about the strange circumstances. I handed the social worker the legal documents, informing everyone that I was there voluntarily, fully employed, mentally competent, and legally represented. I looked at my in-laws and told them this wasn't a wellness check, it was targeted harassment. Chloe stepped forward aggressively, shouting that I couldn't hide behind lawyers forever and that this was our marriage we were talking about. I looked at her with total detachment and told her our marriage had ended the exact moment she conspired with her family to abandon me in the wilderness. Everything since then was just paperwork. Her mother began crying on cue, protesting that they only wanted to help me become independent. I dryly replied, "Mission accomplished. I am so independent I no longer need any of you." The private counselor they brought tried to intervene, asking if I had considered that this entire situation might just be an overreaction to a family misunderstanding. I turned to him calmly and asked, "Doctor, if your spouse convinced you to go on a remote trip, lied to you for 6 months, drove away leaving you stranded 300 miles from home as a prank, and recorded your distress for entertainment, would you call that a misunderstanding?" The counselor shifted uncomfortably, completely blindsided, and muttered that when put that way, it sounded entirely different. Her brother finally exploded, calling the situation insane and accusing me of throwing my entire life away because I couldn't take a joke. I looked at him and told him I wasn't throwing my life away, I was upgrading it. My new work paid better, the cost of living was lower, the people were honest, and nobody in this town believed that psychological torture qualified as family bonding. The social worker was already walking back to her vehicle, completely annoyed at being used. She announced she was entirely satisfied that I was acting voluntarily, was in no danger, and that this was absolutely not a matter for social services. The counselor quickly followed her, visibly embarrassed to be a prop in a toxic family drama. That left me facing Chloe and her family alone in the dirt driveway. Her father, his face purple with rage, stepped forward and whispered that this ended now, threatening to make my life incredibly difficult if I didn't get in the car. I smiled, stepped off the porch, and walked right up to him. I told him he had already tried his worst, and asked how that was working out for him. For the first time, I saw total panic in their eyes. They realized they had zero leverage. They had played their absolute biggest card when they abandoned me, expecting it to break me, but instead, it had set me completely free. Chloe finally broke down, her polished composure cracking into a million pieces. She screamed the ugly truth at me, "We did it because you were boring. You never took risks, never stood up for yourself, and never showed any backbone. We thought if we pushed you hard enough, you'd finally grow a spine." The driveway went dead silent. The truth was out. It was never about character building or helping me grow, they were simply embarrassed by my quiet nature. I looked at her and said quietly, "There it is. You were right, Chloe. I was passive. I let people walk all over me because I thought that's what a good husband was supposed to do. But when you abandoned me here, you didn't just test my survival skills, you showed me exactly how little I meant to you. And more importantly, you showed me how beautiful life feels when I completely stop caring what any of you think." Her brother stepped forward one last time, calling me an arrogant piece of garbage, but my voice dropped to a cold, razor-sharp warning. I told him he was standing on my property now, and unlike the old me, the new me did not tolerate disrespect. He instantly backed down, realizing the physical and mental shift in me was absolute. I looked at them all and told them I had learned that people will only treat you as badly as you allow them to. For years, I allowed them to treat me like a project, an entertainment, a pet. But out here, I discovered what real respect felt like. I told them I was never going back to being their family joke. Her father played his final, desperate card, telling me I would deeply regret this once the novelty wore off, and that I would come crawling back to them when I realized what I had given up. I smiled and told him he was wrong. In a few years, I would look back on this moment, but I wouldn't be thinking about what I gave up. I would be celebrating what I had escaped. They climbed back into their vehicles without another word and drove away down the dirt road. Chloe looked back through the rear window, perhaps expecting me to run after her, but I just turned around, walked back inside, and started prepping my dinner. 6 months later, I officially bought the cabin outright. The family who owned it had been trying to liquidate it for years, and with the money from selling my urban assets, I purchased the 40 acres cash down. No mortgage, no debt, and absolutely no ties to my past. My construction partnership with Marcus flourished into a massive success. The locals loved my work ethic, and the wealthy city clients paid premium rates for our renovations. I changed my phone number, giving it only to trusted friends and verified clients. On the 1-year anniversary of my abandonment, I didn't hold a bitter or resentful gathering. Instead, I threw a massive celebration of absolute independence. The entire town showed up at the cabin, bringing food, sharing incredible stories, and offering genuine, unconditional friendship. These people accepted me for exactly who I was, without games, without tests, and without cruel psychological experiments. During the height of the party, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was Chloe. She wrote that she heard I had bought the place, ending with, I hope you're happy." She was likely looking for some sign of regret, some indication that I missed the luxury or the marriage. I looked around the room at the roaring fire, the honest people laughing, the life I had built from absolute scratch with my own 2 hands, and the legacy left to me by a grandfather who had understood my soul. I typed back 2 words, "I am," then, I blocked the number, deleted the contact, and turned off the phone completely. The party lasted until midnight, filled with genuine human connection. When everyone finally left, I walked out onto the porch and sat down on the steps, the exact spot where they had left me to break a year ago. I looked up at the night sky, at an ocean of brilliant, piercing stars that you could never see past the smog and artificial lights of the city. Their cruel little joke had been designed to shatter my spirit and prove I was weak. Instead, it had accidentally liberated me from a life that was slowly suffocating me to death. The best part wasn't the financial success, the new business, or even the beautiful cabin. The best part was the absolute peace of knowing I would never again allow another human being to treat my kindness as weakness. I had found myself out here in the dark, and this version of me was never going away.